Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Chris Vignoni from PMBA. I'm here with Eric Carrasco, I'm manager in our indirect tax team. We are going to talk to you about another Wayfair issue, an item that we call gap year, or you may otherwise know it as trailing nexus. So as we start all videos, today is Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019, so any information we provide you in this video is as of that date. So, before we start, I'll go into details. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about what a gap year is? Who came up with that phrase?
Sure, we came up with that phrase, actually, gap year. So if you start hearing it, remember that we came up with it. So one of the things about gap year is, and we're getting a lot of these questions from a lot of our clients, is what happens if I had threshold, I passed the economic nexus threshold in certain states, right? But then I no longer have any sales or it's below the threshold. What happens then? And that's kind of the questions we're getting a lot from our clients. Is do I have to be compliant for sales tax after I pass economic nexus and then no longer have it after a period of time? And that's what we are here to kind of answer.
Okay, great. Yeah, so listen, we're calling it gap year because there's this year in particular we have a lot of luxury good dealers, art dealers, companies that have $300, $400, $500 million in sales in one year and then absolutely no sales in next year. But this concept isn't new to state and local tax. So in the past, most states have dubbed this as a trailing nexus concept. So companies that have had physical nexus in the past, they were required to obviously file, and then when the physical nexus ended, companies are like, all right, well, how long do I have to stay in the state? How long do I have to keep filing sales tax returns? It's a great question, and like most questions in SALT, it depends. The answer is it depends on the state. So we had different states over the years that have different levels of rules. Some of the rules were very specific, and some of them are more subjective. So, for example, Washington states that after 4 years after you eliminate physical presence in the state, that you need to continue to collect sales and use tax in that state. That's probably the worst case scenario, Washington. Then we have New York State. Okay, just flipping through my notes here. New York State is pretty specific, actually. New York State out in 2002 came out with a ruling, and they talked about not having it for 4 consecutive quarters in New York State. So if you have 4 consecutive quarters of lack of physical presence in New York State, you can withdraw from that state as well. A state like Texas is really interesting. Texas initially had 12 months, and so once you eliminate physical nexus, you needed to collect for another 12-month period. But then Texas decided to change their rule, and they used the more subjective terminology, which basically says the seller no longer intends to engage in activities or to create nexus within the state. So they're looking at the intention. Now, why taxpayers may be saying, why do I have to keep collecting sales tax if I don't have physical presence in the state? We'll talk about economic nexus. Well, listen, the states are saying the reason why you're selling into the state is really because of this period that you did have physical presence. So all we're saying is that, yes, we're going to let you withdraw, but depending on your level of physical presence and depending how long we determine is a fair amount, you cannot withdraw until that. So that's this concept of trailing nexus. It's been around. And now let's take this into economic nexus. Now, Eric, there hasn't been a lot of states that have come out and specifically talked about trailing nexus or gap years around economic nexus yet, but there have been a few. So what are the few states that have come out said, and kind of what are their rules around that?
Yeah, so like Chris said, there are a few states, not many, as a matter of fact, most states that have implemented economic nexus, most have not come up with a gap year. There have been a few, though. Illinois, for example, Illinois says that after an entire year passes from the time that you had economic nexus and to the next time that you no longer have economic nexus, the following year, you can deregister. So after pretty much a 12-month period, not calendar year. So that's very, very important that we establish that distinction. New York, similarly, actually, to the one you just described, when it comes to trailing nexus, they apply that same rule when it comes to economic nexus. So they look back at the previous 4 sales tax quarters in New York, and they say that if you no longer have a threshold or you no longer pass one of the thresholds or both the thresholds in your cases, you no longer have to, you're no longer required to register and collect sales tax.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, I would expect to see many of the states kind of match up their physical presence rules with their economic nexus rules when it comes to trailing nexus or this gap year. So, for those of you that are out there dealing with this issue, again, the answer is it depends. I would say the general rule is that most states do allow you from deregistering from sales and use tax collection from that state, but you have to look at the specific state rules. You have to look at your activity to make that final determination. Like all the other issues we talk about today, PMBA, we have a team of people working on these issues on a day-to-day basis. We've got a lot of video content out there, so if you enjoyed this video today, check out our other videos. Otherwise, that's it. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us directly. Thanks.